Now, let's switch lanes to the proper discussion, and I would like to ask my director to open the lines now to give you an opportunity to call in and make your contributions, give your reactions to the 22-member proposed cabinet under William Ruto, the president. And as we do that, let's set this context of some of the biggest concerns that have been raised, and that is on the 50% representation. Much as a proposed cabinet unveiled by President Ruto did not meet the expected campaign promise of having women comprise 50% of his team, the president did promise to name the principal secretaries that will be supporting the ministries soon, and perhaps this could be the argument that women will be accommodated therein. And this morning, as we have been having through the paper review, I have Suba Churchill, the Executive Director, Kenya National Civil Society Center, Ruth Ambogo, Political Strategist and Governance Analyst, and as we have learnt, niece to my DVD. But yes, let us get this reaction to this story. 7 women are among 22 cabinet secretaries nominated by President William Ruto and now awaits the Parliament's nod. While campaigning, Ruto pledged to implement the elusive 2/3 gender rule within the first 3 months if he clinches the country's top seat.
Women have taken some of the most key cabinet positions in the Kenya Kwanza government. Former Malindi MP Aisha Jumwa is among those nominated to the cabinet for public service and gender CS post. Kandara MP Alice Wahome will have to vacate her Kandara constituency seat following her nomination as Water, Sanitation and Irrigation CS. East African Community Cabinet Secretary portfolio will be handed to Rebecca Miano, with Roslinda Soipan Tuya being named Environment and Forestry CS. Penina Malonza will occupy the Tourism and Wildlife Ministry should her nomination be approved. Florence Bore has been nominated the Labour CS, while Susan Wafula Nahumicha will take over the Health docket. Father Ruto has appointed Monica Juma as the National Security Advisor and Mercy Wanjau as the Secretary to the Cabinet. Harriet Chigai was appointed as the Women Rights Agency Advisor. During the campaigns, President William Ruto pledged that half of the cabinet will comprise of women. Speaking during the Kenya Kwanza Women Charter Conference in June, he pledged that in his administration, the 2/3 gender rule will be implemented within the first 3 months of his administration.
We shall allocate 50% of all cabinet positions to the women of Kenya.
But 7 women in a 22-member cabinet seems far off compared to what other countries in the region have done. Rozongwe, NTV.
So, as I invited Suba Churchill, Ruth Ambogo, my question to them was, has this been, at least the cabinet that was unveiled yesterday, the cabinet proposed, is this a promise kept to the people, more to the politician, or both? I'll start there.
One, of course, is both, in the sense that His Excellency promised that he would ensure that the 2/3 gender rule is upheld. Now, interestingly, when people speak about the 2/3 gender rule, only to end up with women occupying a third, but even in this particular case, you know, slightly less, because 7 out of 22 is less than a third. If there were 21, if he had appointed 21, because he doesn't have to exhaust, you know, the entire. The president's approach is the minimalist. You'd call it the minimalist approach, because what was why not have 22 women? I mean, 15 women and 7 men. I mean, that would still be 2/3 gender rule. So this idea that women must constitute the smallest, I think we need to increasingly get away from it. And of course, the papers have pointed out, and rightly so, that the president has failed to live by his promise to ensure that, you know, half of the cabinet positions. Of course, we saw those advisory roles for Monica Juma, Hilary Chigiti, Harriet Chigai. But we know that the Constitution pegs the cabinet at 22. So whereas those positions could have been elevated to the level of a cabinet minister in terms of salary and the perks and the support that they'll need, The reality is that we have 22 cabinet slots, which are fully occupied now or proposed to be occupied by men and women that were also, mentioned. So in terms of the promise to the women, I think the president has come to realize. And I told people when I saw him making that remark at the Nyayo Stadium that this is being made in the nick of time in terms of responding to the Azimio's appointment of Martha Karua as running mate. So the president was faced with a challenge that he had to respond to. And so in order to be seen to be also embracing the women folk inclusive governance, as we call it in the Constitution, he had to make a statement that would help rebut the impression that his coalition was not giving priority to women. And now that the reality has dawned, he has already failed the women, at least at the cabinet level. There is, of course, the positions of principal secretaries, which are more competitive. Of course, there is a way in which phone calls will emerge from the House on the Hill to the Public Service Commission to do certain things in a certain way. But you see, it depends on who applies. Of course, we also know that there are people who will be prompted to apply. We saw, the deadline being extended. Part of the reason those deadlines are extended is because there could be certain people who initially perhaps thought they would fall within the cabinet level, but who may not have been considered. So there was need to urge them, to put in the applications and that they'll be given, a good look. The applications will be considered positively. Right. And so, yes, there's that level, and of course it is larger than, the cabinet level. Then, of course, we have the CAS position, which I think is likely to be retained. Again, much larger because those ones are in charge of departments. But the principal secretary are very influential as accounting officers in the ministries. They're the people who control the purse strings. And so if somebody wants, real power in terms of control of resources, I think that is the level to go for. But the fact that it is competitive, the fact that, Kenyans will be looking out, particularly those who think they have missed out on whether, now they have a chance to see one of their own, as they call it, quote unquote, then, it is somewhere, it's a place where, the president really does not have much control and leeway. But in terms of cabinet, he had the prerogative to say and affirmatively say that, I'm appointing 50 women, 50% of them women, and 11, of course, men.
Ruth, let's take a call, and you get to respond first, whether it's a question or contribution, but I'll let you also respond to that question of the promise he made, the campaign promise he made, and that is being read as a failed word that he was given to the nation. Cyprian is watching. He's watching from Nairobi. Good morning, sir. What's your question, your contribution to the discussion?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Niko Salama.
Yeah, my name is Cyprian.
Yes, go ahead.
I think the president has done a lot in terms of giving women a position. We might criticize that he has not reached the 50%, but so far so good. This government is showing the will to support the women in whatever they want to do.
Yes.
By appointing
sorry. Amekata simu, lakini swali tumepata. Swali tumepata. Asante Cyprian on calling in from Nairobi and on just the issue of the women. He feels that the president has done quite a good job on his part.
Mark, I will tell you that for my undergrad for law school, when I joined Strathmore Law School in my first year, the very first day of joining law school in 2013, the first class we had, we were told that by the end of that first lecture, it wasn't a lecture in terms of the units we were doing, but an introductory lecture where we were introducing ourselves and we were being told what to expect for the next 4 years. We were told that by the end of that lecture, we should decide what we will write on 4 years later. And I can tell you for sure, before even the lecturer finished that statement, I said I would write on implementation of the two-third gender principle, both not just within the political space, but at the appointive bodies. And I would want to agree with the gentleman here that what makes us as a country believe that, the bare minimum should be given to women in terms of achieving a third, that what makes us believe that we don't have enough women who could actually receive the two-third of the appointments so that the men can now have a third of the appointments. And why I say so is that I would want to draw from other countries that trusted women to be in charge of their cabinets to a percentage of almost 50% plus. A country like Rwanda, where when the appointments of cabinet secretaries were done, 50%, half of the cabinet was women. Zimbabwe, where half of the cabinet was women. And I'm giving African examples to show that in a society where women have been relegated to holding, to being only useful at the home management level, to being only useful when it comes to taking care of children, as opposed to leadership, that there are countries that have trusted that women could lead critical decision-making platforms. And by the way, what makes us also get to the point of just saying that women should only hold water and sanitation ministries, gender ministries? Why can't we have a woman as a defense minister, like what Uhuru Kenyatta did when he appointed Rachel Mamo at some point? Why can't we have women heading treasury for the first time so that we can see when it comes to the finances of the country? Because the economy right now is the biggest focus of our nation. Every Kenyan is saying, how much money will come to my pocket? Why can't we for the first time say, let a woman head the treasury docket for us to see when it comes to finance and economics and money and markets and trade, that what would a woman do if given a position of being the head of treasury? So I'd want us as a country to begin putting our governments, future governments, and even present governments to account in terms of saying that when we are saying appoint women, we are not just saying that put them in those, sorry to say, positions that look like flowery positions for women, you know, not the ones where we say my duties are light, you know, light duties. Give us the heavy duties, because we want to see, if given heavy duties, what would women produce? And by the way, other countries such as Switzerland and was it, there's a country that experienced a terrorist attack and the prime minister was a woman and she handled it so gracefully. Look at Britain, where their sovereign ruler is the queen. In as much as they have a prime minister, the sovereign ruler is a queen. And we've seen how, now deceased, but we've seen how she was able to rule Britain to the point where Britain is still a strong economic force and power globally. So we must ask ourselves that if given the chance for women to lead, what would they do? And now this is where I would come to the question of the challenges that women are facing in this country in terms of accessing these nominative appointments. Some of the women, and if you go into deeper analysis of how some of the women usually get appointed, you'll find some traces of stories that don't make sense, traces of stories that one would want to say that maybe somebody else who had a more straightforward story and with equal qualifications or even better would have held that position as opposed to the person who's been given that appointment. Okay. So we are saying that progressively we appreciate that we've at least achieved that a third, but we are saying that moving forward we need women to be given more serious positions. And also at the political party level, remember, I'd want to give you an example of the political promises that women were given. Forget about the 50%. How many women were told to step down that they would be appointed as CSs? I have a friend of mine who was an opponent in the Viga women race when I was vying. She was told to step down, that she would be appointed as an MP. The appointment did not come through. Then she was told, you know what, you will be given a CS position. I wonder what made her believe that she would actually be given a CS position looking at her qualifications. All so, yeah. How many women get played when they're told, you know, you're vying for governor, just step down, we will appoint you as a CS, and they have not made it to that list. Let
me take a quick break. I was really controlling myself not to interrupt the issue on gender because it's very sensitive. But Diana, my director, says we have overrun the point where we need to take a break. Get back to finalize this discussion. Stay with AM Live. Welcome back to AM Live. We're having a conversation on the 22-member cabinet that was unveiled by President William Ruto and reactions to the same. And following the naming of the cabinet, there comes excitement and celebrations by those nominated to join the 5th president in running the affairs of the country. But soon as that dust settles, work, public delivery and government expectations will kick in. Lois Wangoi picks for us about 4 cabinet slots that are deemed to be among the most demanding and pressing in nature, as well as their immediate entrees. Take a look.
Ezekiel Machogu is the Cabinet Secretary nominee for Education. He recently lost the Kisii gubernatorial seat under a UDA ticket. Ezekiel Machogu will succeed Professor George Magoha, and top agenda will be the review of the CBC curriculum, which since inception has been controversial. This Cabinet Secretary nominee also comes in at a time when most public universities in the country are in trouble with their books of accounts and possibly facing bankruptcy. Moi University Eldoret being top of that list. Machogu is also expected to show charismatic, hands-on leadership, as did his predecessor, Professor George Magoha. Professor Kithure Kindiki is the Cabinet Secretary nominee for Interior, a slot held by outgoing Interior CS Fred Matiang'i. Kindiki will be welcomed into office by the heightened insecurity among counties in the Kerio Valley, namely Baringo, Turkana, West Pokot, Laikipia, and Samburu. Over 100 people have lost their lives in the Kerio Valley-based skirmishes, according to government records. Will CS nominee Kithure Kindiki steer the William Ruto government into restoring a sense of order in the Kerio Valley, or will this challenge prove stubborn as it did under retired President Uhuru Kenyatta's reign? In the Ministry of Agriculture, Mithika Linturi is taking over from outgoing CS Peter Munya. Already in his entry is the ongoing prolonged drought in over 20 counties. Recently, President William Ruto flagged off relief food to Kenyans in drought-stricken areas. In a month or two, the maize harvest season will be here. It will be interesting to see if Linturi will advise the government to reintroduce the government's plan of buying maize from farmers, a program that was scrapped off by retired President Uhuru Kenyatta. The Ministry of Health will now be handled by Susan Nakumicha. Her entry will be met by the pending Universal Healthcare National Insurance, UHC, never mind the already struggling National Hospital Insurance Fund, NHIF. She will run one of the most heavily funded ministries, both by the government and the donor world. The challenge now is to ensure the integrity of such huge resources to avoid corruption loopholes in the Ministry of Health. For instance, the recent COVID-19 millionaires or even the cancer tenders scandals. Lois Wangoi, NTV, in the county of Uasin Gishu.
As that story was playing, someone in the gallery, I won't say who, said utasikia tu scandal very soon. Let's be hopeful and optimistic that they will deliver once in office after the vetting process. And clearly big tasks ahead for the whole cabinet and the government nonetheless, given the position that we're in as a country. But much as we are clear on the roles or the expectation, are we clear on the roles demarcated for each? And we've spoken about the Deputy President and the role that he will be playing, as well as a prime cabinet secretary that is Ruth Ambogo's uncle, Mudavadi. Do you see an overlap in roles, or is it clear for you in terms of what role they'll be playing?
I think one thing that stood out, and I think I'd already pointed out this, is the attempt by the President to clarify what these roles are. But a lot of this, and I was telling my colleague here, Ruth, that a lot of this depends on the personality of the individual. Mudavadi, goes by the name safe pair of hands. It's an onomatopoeic way of saying, cowardly, which is negative. We have already pointed out, and we have already seen it in the last few weeks after their swearing in, that Gachagua, by his very nature and by his former careers and Bisteta, pushes things. Yeah. You have already seen, and the grapevine has had it. It's a public secret that there was a bit of a tiff about who between the two of them occupies Harambee Annex 1 and Harambee Annex 1. And Gachagua did not take long, in taking over the offices opposite the office of the president in town. And so Mudavadi already will have to look elsewhere in some of those new, relatively new ministries, I would not be surprised if he finds himself patched up somewhere on Nyayo House or Teleposta Plaza or somewhere like that. And that, all those, you know, are part of the optics. In power, the power is about optics. And so, whereas, you know, the president sought to clarify, it will be interesting when now the full details and to what departments will fall under each, you know, will be, because the announcement is just, you know, the cream of it, but the real details will come out in, you know, the circular that will be issued in terms of gazettement of which dockets fall under which. And this is when aggressive ministers or proposed ministers will amass a lot of those dockets. And you remember how, you know, the first cabinet secretary for devolution and planning, Anwar Guru, cleverly brought all manner of things under her docket. And it's about attracting resources, because some of these ministries is about also how much resources you control. If you look at, you know, Mudavadi's position, first, it is new. Secondly, so there will be a lot of figuring out of what it's supposed to look like, and knowing that, you know, the son of Mulembe is not the aggressive type, he might have to rely on the goodwill of the president beyond the announcement to help him figure out what it is that, and a lot of it will depend on how he asserts himself moving forward. So that for me is very key. Okay. But one thing we need to point out in this cabinet is the complete scrapping of the Ministry of Devolution and Planning. I think it would be, we would be doing this process an injustice if we do not point out that one whole ministry has been phased out, and that's devolution and planning, for the reason that it has had its critics. People have said, if the vol units are semi-autonomous, then why should you at the national level have a ministry of devolution? And I think part of the assignments that that Gachagua has been given by the president seem to point out to collaborating with the county governments, and we have already seen him doing that, particularly with respect to, you know, issues of insecurity, issues of famine and drought and so on. And so that tells you that, you know, there's going to be more resources allocated to the office of the deputy president compared to that, you know, of the prime cabinet secretary.
You bring a good point there. Everyone has been asking about the devolution ministry, the arguments that can be thrown in terms of justifying why it's been scrapped in its entirety are there to be heard and told. But in terms of arguments, and it's something you spoke passionately about, Ruth Ambogo, earlier before we took a break, and that is the gender agenda. And this has already been put out there that we're not done with forming the cabinet and the integral team that is under a ministry. And so the positions of PSs, and if we retain CASs, we'll have it there. Would you buy the argument that, wait, you're speaking too early, we will give the women a large, you know, part of the pie with the PS positions as well as the youth in the CAS positions? Would you buy that?
Yeah, I mean, I would, because we don't know what the president has in mind for the remaining positions. And we can only urge, especially as women and young people, especially, in fact, at this point, I've spoken too much about women. Now let me talk about young people. We can only urge the president that at this point, the remaining positions, may the young people be considered. I like what Uhuru Kenyatta did when it came to the former president, when it came to appointing CASs and directors under various parastatals under various ministries. That we saw a lot of young people being appointed to these positions. Some of them were young people who had vied for positions before. Some of them were young people who had campaigned. So it also still looks like it was a political reward mechanism. But we pray that this time round, meritocracy will be applied, where we are saying that, for instance, we will not look at Ruth Ambogo as somebody who was such a staunch supporter of Raila Odinga, so we will not give her anything in this government. But we will say, what is her CV? What does her CV look like? what are some of the issues she's been passionate about the past 4 years. And it doesn't have to be Ruth Ambogo. It could be somebody else. You know, let's talk about an Ochieng somewhere, Suba Churchill here. What is his CV? What does it look like? He's been in charge of civil societies pretty much his entire career life. So then when you look at such a person, then you would want to say, for instance, the Ministry of Trade, East African societies, you would want to place Suba there in a parastatal there, or put him somewhere as a CAS in such a particular department. And you would also want to consider young people below the age of 35. Like, I don't mean youthful, you know. Whenever, and it's a problem that I have with the youth, that when we see one of our own who is popular, who is youthful, because by the time you are above 35, you are youthful, you are not young. When we see somebody like, let's say, for example, in the last administration, Echesa, in the first Uhuru Kenyatta administration, when Echesa was given the ministry for, was it, what was it, youth and sports?
Sports, yes.
Sports and youth. We celebrated that that was a young person. That was not a young person. He was a youthful person because he was above the age of 35. So we want to see in the upcoming appointments young people, and of those young people, a great percentage of them being women. And regardless, yes, regardless of the political parties or your political affiliation, because at the end of the day, this is our government. It is our government to steer forward. Yes. It is our country to push forward. And if the best of the brains who can help steer it forward are people from the party that don't necessarily support you, give them the chance to show you that even if their leader became president, what would they have done had they been appointed? Again, I'll say watu wanaoga na wanarudi soko haraka sana, given your submissions. To Suba, on that point of PS's allocation as well as CAS, parastatals, but definitely for the team that comprises a cabinet, if indeed we see that there are more allocations given to women than men to accommodate the 50% promise, would you buy that, especially coming from your vantage point as a National Civil Society Center Executive Director? You know, the Masai, there is a reason why a parent is called by the name of his or her firstborn. If you are the firstborn, yes, and they'll never, of course other children will be born in the family, but they'll never, no matter how they come, replace the firstborn, even if the firstborn unfortunately passes on. The first impression lasts forever. And on this particular one, even if you talked of PSS, there is no other position that goes with the word cabinet. So the president has missed it. The president has missed it. And the letter and spirit of the Constitution is that women, you know, not more than 2/3 of every elective and appointive. So the president has made his first appointment, and we must say that he has already missed it. Whether he will, of course, outdo himself with the principal secretaries, that will be another level. Yes. But on the cabinet, yes, you know, those are principal secretaries in the ministries, but the word here is, the key word here is cabinet. So he has already missed it. There was an attempt to pepper it with the 2 advisory positions, Monica Juma and Harriet Chigai and so on, but that is not the cabinet. The cabinet is not more than 22, and at that level, the women are 7 out of 22. Yeah. It is even less than 1/3. So he has already missed it, let alone being half the one that he promised. So I think that, yes, the president has a chance to make amends at the principal secretary level, to make amends at the cabinet chief administrative secretary at that level, to make amends at, you know, appointments to ambassadors. But remember, there's something clever that the immediate former president did, making so many ambassadorial appointments towards the end of his term, and some of them, you know, for 3 years. I do not want to believe that the deputy, now the president, who is the former deputy, would want to, you know, send all those people packing, because it has its own political implications. Yes. We have always seen politicians saying our people are being hounded out of government, and I do not think, you know, the president wants to do that. All right, we only have 10 minutes remaining. I want us to cover some of the other points that I had put out. Are we being naive or at least idealistic by criticizing or talking to the issue of the political appointees, Ruth? Because in the previous administration, there was the attempt to include technocrats, but we saw it was largely good on paper, but practically speaking,
the true colors showed, especially in the campaigns of some of the CSs who are now on their way out. The politicians, this is just politics at play and would happen anyway, at least from your view as a political strategist, would you say?
Well, what I'd like to say is that, remember, I don't think it would have been different if Raila Odinga, for instance, became president. Because remember, in his proposals for through BBI, he had mentioned that he would have wished to see that politicians appointed as cabinet secretaries. Remember that. In the BBI proposals, one of the proposals was that a certain percentage of the cabinet would be politicians. And you see, we should be very careful to not think that just because a cabinet is full of politicians, it would be ineffective. Because at the end of the day, politicians are leaders. And you know, what we are looking for is leaders. We are not looking for for saints. We are looking for leaders. We are not in a church. We are now looking for leaders. And some of these politicians are people who've led their counties, constituencies for quite some time. And they've actually brought about change and development. When you look at their record in terms of parliament, the kind of changes they have brought in terms of legislation, they have proven to be people who can bring forth policy. And being a cabinet secretary is all about policy. And that is why I'm saying, let's not be so quick to fight the likes of Aisha Jumwa, because as a legislator, there must be some legislations she must have pushed for. If not pushed for, she must have added her voice to, meaning that she can be a policy maker, you know, regardless of what people would want to say in terms of her academic qualifications. And as I finish and close, I mean, I'd like to say that we are watching to see whether these people deliver or not. And if we get to a point where they're not delivering for us, may the president act like Kibaki. You change your cabinet. If they're not working, fukuza ye waende nyumbani, new people come in, take over, because at the end of the day, all we want is a country that is stable and functioning.
Speaking to that point, Suba, on the issue of technocrats, as you saw it envisioned in the constitution-making process, now there are more politicians. It is rewarding, let's call it as it is. But the president did indicate that these cabinet secretaries will be held to account and will be summoned in Parliament, not just with the committees, but to answer to direct questions from the members of the National Assembly. Do you see this as a good thing in holding them to account?
You know, first of all, I want to say as I conclude that the president has actually implemented BBI proposals.
Yes.
That he vehemently opposed.
Yes.
One, he has appointed prime cabinet secretary. There's no difference with the prime minister thing. Secondly, the proposal that these cabinet secretaries will be answering questions on the floor of parliament. That was a BBI proposal.
Yes.
Which takes us to the point that there's really nothing in politics that is bad or good. What normally matters to politicians is who is pushing it. Now we are seeing the president steadily and consciously implementing the BBI without calling it such. My first worry with this cabinet is that whereas in 2013 we never had any single elected leader being asked to step down for appointment, this time we have had the largest. We had one in 2017. I think it was Charles Keter being asked to step down as senator for Kericho.
Yes.
But it was the only one because somebody felt that he would be the most strategic to handle the energy docket. And of course, we know what happened in the energy docket thereafter. And that's why, you know, when we had one of the papers saying David Chirchir holds the key, we have had stories about scandals in the energy docket, which, if they were to continue, would really hurt the intention to lower the cost of energy. But for the first time, we have serving senators and members of National Assembly being appointed into the cabinet. And surely, do we have to go through those by-elections? In Bungoma, for example, where the speaker, Moses Wetangula, comes from, in Elgeyo Marakwet, why did they go for this if really their intention was to serve in the cabinet? In Garissa Township, for example, where Dendwale comes from, honestly, in, you know, Kandara, where, you know, Mheshimiwa Alice Lawome comes from, I think that in a government that claims to have come to power and inherited an empty coffers, as the deputy president put it, these by-elections are going to cost us a lot of money.
Yes.
That could have been avoided. And so the fact that we have a political cabinet, including people who are still in office as senators, as members of National Assembly, is not a good thing.
Okay.
But by and large, I think that as a civil society actor, I would be failing my sector if I didn't remind the cabinet nominee for Interior and National Administration that we have the Public Benefit Organizations Act, which the Jubilee administration that the current president was part of, failed to implement for 10 years. We are looking forward to him putting pen to paper and announcing the gazettement of the Public Benefit Organizations Act so that we can create the enabling policy and regulatory environment for the civil society in this country.
And it's so good to hear, because we know that the administration will be held to account. There's been, what would you call, a vacuum in terms of the role of opposition. And let me speak to it as you give your last submission, Ruth. And this is just to quote what the Nairobi Senator Edwin Sifuna tweeted yesterday. I don't know whether to call him part of the opposition, because they're yet to pronounce themselves on the issue of the cabinet that has been unveiled. And he says, if our colleagues in the National Assembly stay true to their oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, more than half of those criminals, he calls them, proposed should not make it to cabinet. Again, this is Edwin Sifuna's quote. What's your view on this as we move to the vetting process and what is expected of them?
Well, I have very strong views on that, in the sense that, yes, we have analyzed these cabinet secretaries based on their experiences, based on where they come from, based on what we basically analyze them based on the lens of what we expected the president to do. But on a personal level, I agree with Senator Sifuna that a lot of them have tainted images. A lot of them have cases that are still pending in court. And many of them, sorry to say, will fail the integrity test. Remember that the Constitution provides in Chapter 6 of the Constitution, where it begins by saying that authority bestowed upon a public servant is basically a trust that is placed above you or upon you to be able to exercise it in a manner that brings confidence to the office that you hold, to be able to exercise it in a manner that brings not just confidence, but also respect to the office that you hold. But when we look at some of these individuals, I won't mention names, we know their cases. When you Google some of their public cases, some of the cases are so ugly, you know, they go to direct violation of human rights. In fact, yesterday when the cabinet was announced, my first comment was how ironic it is that some of the greatest violators of human rights are now being rewarded with positions to protect the rights of human beings. Because at the end of the day, as a public servant, all you are doing from a human rights perspective, from the constitutional lens perspective, from any perspective, from the county acts of devolution perspective, all you are doing is protecting the rights of the Mwananchi. Yes. You are serving the Mwananchi. You are protecting and defending what is constitutionally guaranteed to the Mwananchi. But now when you yourself, who has been selected or appointed to lead a particular docket, have cases or have cases and incidences that dictate that you are a human rights violator, then honestly we can't trust you. And we hope this is the point where we will now start seeing how they vote. Are politicians going to vote with the conscience of the fact that they represent Mwananchi first, as opposed to their political parties and the political cronies, or not? This is the test, the first test we will give our politicians in terms of how they will vote in parliament.
Thank you, Ruth. Last word to Suba as the Executive Director of Kenya National Civil Society Center. Your expectation of the opposition to speak to this cabinet that's been unveiled, and what do you want them to, at least in terms of take their position in terms of holding the administration to account?
Of course, the first step in holding the administration to account will be in the vetting. Okay. And asking the difficult questions, because we have also seen past vettings that were more or less, you know, tea parties, where, you know, difficult questions were avoided. We have had, you know, instances in this country where people have been appointed to cabinet and then later issues emerge as to whether they even finished Form 4 level of education. I mean, we want those questions asked. And that's why even if any of these people will pass through, they must be asked what the implications of some of the, you know, criminal cases that are facing them. Yeah. I've seen some of the people in this list, I'll not go into details, who have said certain disparaging things about segments of the country's population. And because when you are a cabinet secretary, you serve everybody. Yes. Would that not, you know, impede one from delivering service, and how will you be perceived? Because at times it's about perception. Even when you talk about corruption, it's about what people think about, you know, a certain issue in the society. So people will be should be held to account, and I think the opposition by now should be doing research. We as civil society are ready to help, and will be, you know, submitting memoranda when some of these people will be, vetted, because it is not just the sole responsibility of elected leaders. We as members of the public will be doing that, and will be raising our own concerns about the lack of certain capacities to deliver on certain dockets, and our misgivings about some of those people being approved in terms of, you know, cabinet secretary positions. On that note, let's end it for this discussion. Mr. Suba Churchill, the Executive Director, Kenya National Civil Society Center, and Ruth Ambogo, Political Strategist and Governance Analyst. And as we have learnt in the course of this discussion, Nis to my DVD. Asante sana for your time. And the discussion goes on online. Of course, our team on the digital space have put some of the highlights of this discussion, and you can keep commenting. And something else you can keep commenting on, and that's coming up, is Winnie Lubembe's Your World discussion. That is up next. Stay with NTV.